know, cleaning is something we don't want to do, as I mentioned in the presentation inside. We don't want to be overly aggressive. We don't want to do it too often. There's a lot of different ways you can clean, but what I'm going to recommend most of the time is this product, because it's not going to kill you if you do get a splatter a little on you, because it's biodegradable and it's not toxic. It's not considered toxic, so when if it gets shipped in the mail, it doesn't need hazmat shipping. So all that I've done, and I use these sprayers. These are from Home Depot, and these are like $7. I like these because they're really easy to work with. You can use a bigger, you know, I mean, I do that too sometimes, you know, with a hose, but like a fertilizer sprayer, you know, those, and even backpack sprayer or whatever. But I mean, as far as simplicity and low cost, you can't beat this. And so for most cleaning solutions, you would pre-wet the stone with water. And so this is an exception. In fact, it's better if you don't, because this is not going to harm the stone. And what's going to happen is it's going to get in the pores, and then it's going to kill the root structure. So there's a situation where we could clean this with only water and actually clean it pretty well, probably to some degree, but that it could come back, you know, prolifically. And so all that's in here is D2, straight up and undiluted. I just filled the container, and so I'm just going to wet it down. And so the downside to this is that it's about $35 a gallon, but it goes quite far. And your cemetery, it's not overwhelming. You're not talking $1 million. And so, now you'll read about things like you should clean from the bottom up. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, it's not really applicable on small objects. If you clean a big wall and you clean the upper part, and all the staining from the upper part is going down, it could lock in the lower staining. So the theory is you clean from the bottom up. And so now what we'll do is we'll just let it sit on here about 5 minutes, and then we're going to start going to the next step. But there's other options, and one option is to just do this and walk away, and it will eat away at it, and it'll just stay in the stone. Another option, which I do, is especially things that have a lot of staining, is I'll wet it like this. I'll cover it with a big plastic bag. I use these things they're called drum liners because they're clear and they're 55 gallons, so they fit over any stone. And then, so while it's still wet like this, I can cover it, put tape around the bottom, and leave that on there for like a day or two. Because then, but the option using the plastic, if you want to come back in a day or two, it'll have loosened a lot up. Then you can just open it, add some water, brush it, and rinse it. I find that to be quite effective, especially on some really tenacious kinds of staining. So, but this is we're just straight out, and you know, without any weighting is what we'll do a lot of the time. And so the next option is to use plastic scrapers because they're softer than the stone. And so this scraper started out like this and ended up like this because the plastic is so soft. And so not all plastic scrapers are alike. We want ones that have really soft plastics. And so these scrapers, you can get them in sets of 3, and they come in these 3 sizes for about a few bucks. So what we can get the raised growth just like this, and just take it right off. And just as I'm just going to get the heavy stuff here. So it's not like the brush might have taken this off also, but it'll clog up the brush. It'll tend to just smear it around. If it's really thick, sometimes it's best to knock this off first and then hit it with the D2, because sometimes it'll just stay kind of on the surface and it won't even hit the stone. One other advantage of getting it wet is you won't have to breathe any of it. Generally, it'll kind of suck it up and it won't really make dust, because it's probably not good to breathe this. Stiffer nylon, so sometimes, and not in this situation, we don't really need it, but into the letters like this kind of, because it's just kind of like a stiffer toothbrush kind of. Some people use toothbrushes, but they tend to be a little too flexible and don't really get off much. So they can be helpful sometimes. So that's pretty good. So I usually use this in one hand. So here, take this in one hand, put the scraper down, and that way you can kind of irrigate the area you're working just as you're working and wash it away so you can see what you're doing, and so you can keep it hydrated and kind of rinse as you go. And so just keep going. So the end result here is going to be a stone that's cleaner, but that's not completely clean and is not white. But what's going to happen is this is going to keep cleaning. And so the marble that we clean here, This afternoon, it will dry and it'll lighten up a little. By tomorrow, it'll be whiter, and in about a month, it'll be quite white. So it's a delayed reaction. If there is atmospheric staining mixed in, then that won't all come out. Marble is more difficult to clean because of the pores, and the staining gets deeper into the pores. And so it tends to be a harder material to clean. The part, if we're joining it or we're setting it into a base, we have to clean that part really well. And in fact, this one is still in the ground, and we didn't even disturb it at all. Sometimes when you put the D2 on, the stone will turn orange or bright yellow or crazy colors. Whenever there's a reaction like that, that color will always go away after, so it's never to be worried about, but sometimes it can be a little scary and disconcerting. So I'm just mentioning it. We're not seeing that here, so it may never happen in this cemetery. I'm not sure exactly chemically why that happens, but whenever that happens, it's always a reaction, and then the stone ends up always being much cleaner in the end. Not going to look new, but they're not. You don't want them to look new. They're not new stones anyway, and so this is about as good as it gets. And for readability too, this is kind of hard to read in the wrong light right now. Sun is coming from the side, that makes it readable. And so if the sun is directly behind it, it'll be like a spotlight on it and it won't be readable. If the sun is behind it, it won't be readable. But when it's from the side, it's very readable. And there's also something called a poultice, which is like usually made of like a clay, like kaolin or fuller's earth. That's a way you can clean like stains that are really inground into something, and you like put the poultice on it. It's like a plaster kind of thing, and then you usually protect it and keep it from drying out too quickly, but eventually you let it dry out totally, and then you knock it off. And the idea of a poultice is that it draws the staining into it. And so like say there's oils or something in a stone or something that's really in ground, and also what they'll do is they'll add things to the poultice to make it more effective to remove that particular kind of staining. But it's a slow process, and it's not something that you're probably going to have to do, but I just mention it because it is done. We don't ever want to use a bleach, period, on gravestones. We don't want it. Chlorine is not recommended, although there's some controversy if it is a marble stone about using a diluted chlorine solution. I don't generally recommend that either. We don't want to use an acid ever, period, except the one exception would be modern granite. We don't have any here, so we can just say we don't, in this site, we're not ever going to use any acid cleaner. No sandblasting ever. You'd be surprised. People still lightly, monument companies especially are notorious for that. They will lightly sandblast marble monuments to make them look new again. Still today, they'll do that. There's no one that has experience in the field that would ever recommend doing that, because you're removing stone, you're opening up the pores. It will look new really fast, but you're removing stone. It's detrimental. I mentioned a garden hose. We can use a garden hose to rinse. We don't want to take a really pretty powerful nozzle and go right up against it, because that's almost like a pressure washer. And so pressure washer is one other thing. We don't want a pressure wash historic stones either, okay? Modern granite, again, different solution. Modern granite, when I say modern, about really for anything generally in the 1900s, especially from World Wars on, is pretty much modern, very dense, and you can use a pressure washer on modern granite. Okay, so it's a different animal, it's a different material, you can do different things to it. So I just want to make that distinction. But we don't have any of that in here, so we don't have to worry about it.